I absolutely love instant ramen. It's one of my guilty pleasures. There's two other things that I enjoy doing. One is experimenting and doing kind of weird stuff, and the second is distilling. I think you guys see where this is going, right? How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse and this is Still It. Pretty self-explanatory, right? We're gonna mess around and see if we can't turn this into a tasty alcoholic beverage. To do so, I have a new little toy that I've been using recently, and that is the yellow label Angel Yeast, which means I don't have to mash or boil a starch sauce to turn it into alcohol. So the general plan here, guys, is we're gonna take the ramen and see if we can't ferment it into a ramen wine, and then find out what happens when we distill it. Is it gonna be interesting? Yeah, I'm sure. Will it be tasty? No freaking idea. The first thing we're going to need is, of course, ramen. I did have 25 packs to start this with, but I may have got a little bit hungry and delved into my stash. So we're using 22. I've actually got two different flavors here. One is the Shin Ramen, quite tasty. I love this stuff. My current favorite, however, though, is the clay pots. A little more earthy, a little bit more savory and umami. Very, very nice. We're also going to need a big old bucket to start putting everything into. This might take me a little while to get these things shucked, so give me a second, guys.
So I'm literally just giving these a quick crack in the bag to make them a little more handleable. The noodles go into the buckets ready for fermentation, and the flavor packets I'm keeping separate simply because I don't know at this stage whether or not they're going to affect fermentation or not. We'll add them back later. With all the noodles successfully into the bucket, I added warm water and sort of mashed them up a little bit, simply to let them soften up and become a little more pliable. Next, the noodles were split into two buckets to give us a little bit more clear liquid to work with later on, and each bucket was topped up with either hot or cold water depending on which it needed to make volume, and pitching temp, I was aiming for 30 degrees Celsius. Next up, I measured out 12 grams of the yellow label yeast for each bucket of the fermenter. Now, if you don't know about yellow label yeast, you can watch this video with the card in the top right hand corner. After pitching the yeast, I gave it a good stir with a paint mixer, popped a cover on the fermenter, fermented at 30 degrees, and let it sit for about 2.5 weeks.
This stuff has had plenty of time to ferment out now, and as it happened, it had about a week after the last signs of fermentation in the vessel between then and now, and that was simply because I was taking a bit of a holiday break. But it's worked out well. Now things have settled out. You can see that the noodles have mostly settled at the top. There's a yeast cake at the bottom, and we are going to get that out of the bucket with as few chunky bits from the noodles as possible, because I am going to be distilling it in the T500 today, and that thing apparently is quite prone to scorching. It hasn't scorched on me yet, but I don't want to push it. I'll be honest with you guys, I've already distilled the other bucket. I did that off camera to figure out the best way to get the stuff out of here and into the still, and just to sort of see how distillation was going as well. The long and short of it is the easiest way for me, I found, to get it out of here is to whack a siphon down below the noodle cake, above the yeast cake, siphon out and have a sieve sitting above the T500 just to catch any little stray little bits of noodles, and it worked really well. Of course, if you have a still where you can distill on grain or on noodle, as the case may be, then I would suggest going ahead and doing that. At this stage, we basically have fermented noodles in our pot of our still, ready to be distilled, which are hardly ramen. But you may remember these things that we saved from earlier on. I know, I get it. Instant ramen is hardly ramen. I agree, but the stuff is damn tasty and it's got ramen on the box, so get over it. The reason I didn't put this stuff into the ferment is I wasn't sure whether or not it was going to mess with the yeast, whether or not it was going to mess with the enzymes, whether or not it was just going to kill the yeast off. I didn't know, so I played it safe and I held it out. But what I am going to do is add some of this back into the pot right now. The first batch I did, I put 6 of these things in and 3 of these things in. This is the veggies, this is the flavouring sachet. That was just a touch on the strong side. So this time we're going 4 and 2. The still's on, it's heating up. Like I said, we're using the T500, and no, you don't need to use this still. I'm only saying this because it seems like people get hung up on this a little bit sometimes when I make these videos. Honestly, at this point, the still is operating as a pot still. We don't have the reflux water connected at all. A pot still is mostly a pot still, so use what you got, guys. We are going to call this the stripping run. I'm not worried about making cuts. I'm not worried about the speed that it's coming off. I'm just running it through to cut it down on volume and also get rid of the chunky stuff that's in there so we can do our spirit run later on. The stripping run's complete. All I needed to do was empty the pot out of all the old stuff, put the low wines, which if you're not sure what that is just the name we give the result of the stripping run. So the stuff that came out of the stripping run, the 2 stripping runs that I've done, went back into the pot, and now we're ready for our spirit run. Honestly, not a whole lot is going to be different about this run, other than the fact that I am going to be running the T500 through a power controller, simply so this time I can dial in the speed of the offtake that I want. So I'm not worried about the temperature in the still, I'm not worried about the temperature at the head. None of that stuff matters to me. The thing that matters is the speed of the offtake, and because this is quite a small still, I'm going to have it running at just a drip. The low ones did taste really, really interesting, so I am really looking forward to pulling some finished product, getting on over to the bench and tasting some final product for you to let you know what this stuff tastes like. Oh, yes, before we finish this little segment, a reminder, I am running this entirely as a pot still. There's no reflux in the column, no active reflux, no water going into the column. The only water going into this T500 at the moment is into the product condenser.
The head's cut was really not surprising. Standard nail polish remover and jaggy needed to be cut out, but the tails were interesting. They didn't go wet cardboard, instead they went kind of astringent, and there was a strange sourness that I recognised from the noodle soup.
It is a overcast but really freaking nice day out here. I'm guessing you can probably hear the birds. So I thought, instead of sitting inside on the bench, why not let's sit out here? But before we taste this stuff, I need to say a huge thank you to the Patreons. Thank you so much, guys. I don't get to do this stuff without you. And honestly, I really do appreciate it. So cheers. Just to let you know, guys, I kind of got lazy on this. I filled the bottle up with the cuts that made the cut, and then decided just to proof it until the bottle was full. And we ended up with 59%. So why not? Let's keep it at that, shall we? Now, straight away you get ramen, and the ramen sort of flavor has died off a little bit, and I guess it's kind of settled into a interesting kind of powdery somehow, a little bit lemony, seaweedy, general umami-ness on the nose, and I haven't tasted it for 2 days, so I'm very interested to see what it's like. Actually, that's mellowed out. When I first distilled it, it just straight up tasted like the flavouring packets, which wasn't surprising, but it was also just a little bit too much. Like, it wasn't like a spirit. It just tasted like dipping your finger in those flavouring packets. Quite artificial, quite one-dimensional. This has evolved a little. Obviously, it's quite warm because it's 59%. I could proof it down more if I wanted to, but yeah, I'm happy to leave it like this because honestly I probably will use it in some cooking. Bearded and Bored, when I was talking to him about this originally, suggested some flambe with it, so that could be fun, and I guess the higher proof works well for that. You know what, this is actually mellowed into a drink that tastes like a drink. It is definitely odd, it is definitely a little out there, it is definitely on the savoury side rather than the sweet side, which very few spirits are, but man, I feel like there could be a place in cocktails for this. It has that savouriness, it has just a hint of chili, and then it kind of has the, I guess, the more aromatic flavors that come along with the ramen. And keep in mind, guys, obviously this is just a crappy instant ramen. If we had done a real ramen, I'm sure we could have got all sorts of really fun flavors coming through. So what I want to hear from you guys is what you would suggest in terms of cocktails to put this in. I think that is where this is going to shine, where I would actually drink it. It has this super unique flavor that I have never tasted in a spirit, obviously. And by itself it's okay, but I think it has the ability to add that uniqueness to a cocktail and sort of meld things together, or give it a little, you know, a little funny undertone sitting somewhere that you weren't expecting. The obvious one to me, and something that a few people have suggested to me, is a dirty martini. Unfortunately, I don't have the vermouth on hand, but I'll try that in the next few days, I'm sure. But what do you guys think? What could it be used for? What would you use it for? Or is it just an abomination that never should have been made? If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. That tells YouTube that it is a good video, and that it should let other people watch it as well. That's very helpful to me. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button down below to see more things like this. Normally I make more serious spirits, but every now and again we do something weird too. And more important than that, guys, keep on chasing the craft, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.